Okay. What do you think, Dave?
Today was the day of numbers. Basically what we did was put on a crash reconstruction expert, Corporal Mike Chapman with the Department of Public Safety, who's a crash reconstruction expert. And basically what he testified to is that the victims did not have enough of a chance to react. This happened in less than a second, and no human could have possibly reacted to that based on the mechanics of the crash. What he testified to is that at their speeds that they were traveling, they were moving at roughly 200 feet a second towards each other. And as they got over the hill, the vehicles practically impacted almost instantaneously. So Trooper Corporal Chapman testified to those effects. He also talked about the vehicle's black box. The defendant's black box didn't have any relevant data on it because it kept on running after the crash. However, the victim's crash data retrieval showed that they were moving at roughly the speed limit of 60 miles per hour, a little bit above the speed limit. And in his opinion, both vehicles were moving at substantially the same speed, which is why he believed that they were moving at roughly 200 feet per second towards each other. Additional witnesses to testify today were the lab personnel who came in and testified about the amount of alcohol in the defendant's system. She provided 3 blood samples over a period of an hour and a half, and they went from a 0.26 shortly after the crash to a 0.20 an hour and a half after the crash, which is consistent with the evidence because the body tends to process alcohol at a generally known rate. And in that hour and a half time period, she processed out about a 0.05 worth of alcohol. That is still over 3 times the legal limit in Texas, and that directly correlates with what Oscar Williams from the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission testified to he saw on the video. So the receipts match up to the video matches up to the scientific evidence, which goes to show that she intentionally drank that much and she got behind the wheel of a motor vehicle and drove recklessly, resulting in 2 deaths and 1 serious bodily injury case.
Now, what about, talk about the DNA? They were able to get some DNA. You had the experts, when they had got the DNA sample to begin with, and they also had the expert out of Houston DPS lab get things out of the truck to match that DNA. Kind of tell me a little bit about that. Good stuff they want to get.
One of the other numbers that we spoke about today was provided by a DPS DNA analyst who tested several samples taken from the interior of the vehicle. She took a sample from the steering wheel, she took a sample from the exploded airbag, and she took a sample from the defendant's sock, which was jammed into the floorboard during the crash on the driver's side. And she testified that basically the results of somebody having that profile is 1 in 2.02 sextillion or something to that effect. It's basically a 1 followed by 21 zeros. And that's just an astounding number that nobody can really estimate as to how big it is. The DPS analyst said that in her opinion, the defendant was the one that provided those samples or left those biofluids on those particular objects. And those were important because the defendant got out of the vehicle and she claimed that she wasn't driving. She tried to say that somebody else was driving. But the DNA evidence shows her hands were on the wheel, shows that when the airbag exploded, it exploded onto her, and that her foot, when the vehicle wrecked and crushed up on her foot and kept her sock and her shoe in the floorboard, it was her foot that was there in the floorboard between the gas and the brake. And that's why we think and we believe that she was in fact the driver, as she ultimately admitted.
What about the doctor from Herman? I mean, he kind of talked about the injuries a little bit on both patients, both on David and also on Baukus, and also her condition when she got in there, her demeanor and such.
There was an emergency room doctor testifying. He was the doctor that treated both the defendant and also one of our victims, David Porras. He was on duty at Memorial Herman in the Woodlands that night. And what he testified to is that the defendant basically suffered a few slight small fractures in her foot. Of course, she was complaining about that all night. She was also complaining about them taking off her ring and cutting her clothes. But that was the extent of her injuries that she suffered in this crash. In addition to that, he treated the victim and testified about how the victim's jaw bones were fractured, resulting in the loss of most of his teeth in his upper jaw, which he still suffers from today. Also talked about several other injuries and spinal column fractures that he suffered, and that in his opinion, those injuries are debilitating and will be debilitating for basically the rest of his life, and could have very easily resulted in his death if they were left untreated. And the emergency room medical doctor testified to those, obviously because we have to prove that the victim, David Porras, suffered serious bodily injury.
What about the demeanor of the defendant while she was in the emergency room?
The doctor testified about her demeanor. He said that he was shocked by her demeanor and he wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, basically. He didn't know if she knew that she had killed 2 people because she was laughing in the emergency room and showed a very inappropriate demeanor and behavior. So he told her that she killed 2 people, and she responded by laughing when he told her that.
And where do we go tomorrow now?
We expect that we'll conclude our case tomorrow with the forensic toxicologist. He'll talk about the numbers that we got into evidence today for the alcohol results and the drug results and what they mean. We'll also put on Dr. Veazey to talk about the mechanism of the injuries and deaths on the passengers and on the driver, Nicole Adams. And then we'll conclude with David Porras, who's our surviving victim, to testify about the events that night.